Gentlemen, please take your seats. The spotlight is about to begin. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mystery Matt, and you're listening to the Mystery Matt Spotlight Podcast. I don't know who's listening to Then I Got High over there, but that's pretty funny. Can you hear it?
What?
Someone's listening to Then I Got High over there. Oh. Hopefully that don't come through. Anyways, this evening, we are continuing our coverage of cults, and we've got kind of a controversial one this evening. You thought Manson was bad. Well, we found worse. I think we found worse. Didn't we find worse?
Yeah, this is only the iceberg. It's not even all of them.
Yeah. So what are we talking about tonight, Sarah?
We are talking about the LDS, the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon religion.
Well, parts of it.
We're going to explain why we believe it's more cult and less religion.
Why you believe?
I think Greg has
I don't know anything about it, so you'll have
we'll have to
sway my
educate
vote.
You guys.
Yeah.
All right, so the Mormon religion has a lot of cult-like attributes. There are tons of offshoots of the Mormon Church, including LDS or Church of the Latter-day Saints. I've included this into our cult month for several reasons. One, I noticed an upswing in murders related to the LDS faith. Some are domestic and less cultish, but then looking further into it, I discovered so much more. Oh, I lost my thing. Oh, no. Stupid. Sorry, my iPad or my...
No excuses.
It's not an iPad. It's a stupid Android. iPad would never do this to me. Give me a second.
Well, I would have done it years ago.
Huh?
Would have done it years ago.
Yeah, you bite me, ass. No, I'm not reading you. Okay. Okay, so... Anyways, the Mormon religion was started in around the 1820s and 1830s by Joseph Smith. Smith indoctrinated the Book of Mormon, and the Book of Mormon has Christian-based ideologies with modifications by Smith and other Mormon leaders. Smith believed to be the one true prophet, which is something you will hear a lot of in the upcoming cult leaders.
And previous.
And previous ones, too.
Previous ones that we've already talked about.
That they like to proclaim of themselves, right? The difference in the Book of Mormon is that it has doctrines of eternal marriage, polygamy or plural marriage, sexual purity, and stuff like blood atonement. Brigham Young first preached of blood atonements in the 1850s, which teaches that the idea of spilled blood is for retribution in the eyes of God. That it's to rid the sinner of his or her life to purify them in hopes that they could reach God's kingdom, or something close to that. I'm basically paraphrasing here. However, this practice was taken out of the modern-day Mormonism for the longest time. Although, as you will hear, not everyone got the Mormon memo.
The Mormon memo.
Yeah. But Greg, you looked into the rules of the LDS and the Mormon University, Brigham Young University's policy and rules. So have at her, pitter patter.
All right. Yes, I was looking into this, and as I was looking into it, the more I felt that this definitely is more, to me, as a cult-related religion, I guess you could say. Yeah. And so anyways, I'm going to start telling you some of the rules and stuff like that. I'll just name all the rules first, and then I'll go into every one of them and then explain what they are. Some of them are self-explainable, but I mean, for the most part, they're fun.
I'm ready.
You're ready? All right. So, adhering to the church's law of health, paying tithing, living the law of chastity, participation in lay leadership of the church, refraining from work on Sundays when possible, family home evenings, and monitoring other church members. Those are the laws, basically. LDS believe choosing to obey God's laws or rules demonstrate their love for God and bring blessings, increased happiness, and hope of salvation. These blessings by God can be spiritual or temporarily or both.
Okay.
So, I'll
so
start
far
off.
Still sounds like religion.
Yeah.
It's normal stuff.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily disagree with the whole not working on Sundays. I think that should come back. We used to have that. The stores
Yeah,
were
people
closed
not
and
working
stuff.
on Sundays?
Yeah, I think that should be a thing still.
Shut her down.
That one I agree with.
Yeah.
That one I agree with.
Yeah.
Yes, that one probably is the one that everyone would probably agree with the most of all of them. Yeah. So the first one I'm going to talk about is family home evenings. It's basically LDS church members are encouraged to set aside one evening a week, usually a Monday, to spend time as a family, so they can study the faith gospel principles and family activities. Daily family prayer is also encouraged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty normal.
Yeah.
No, I mean, for religion, it sounds pretty normal.
The law of chastity. So this one is basically no masturbation.
Some people have the purity thing going on, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big no-no for the church, and the church encouraged their people to refrain from it as much as possible.
Well, I wouldn't do it in church. That's not a good idea at all. That's definitely how you get caught.
And during regular annual worthiness interviews, they are asked about any sexual sins and masturbation to the church leaders in order to repent and to be considered worthy to participate in weekly sacrament or temple rites. So
if you jerk it, you're not allowed to come say hey to God or something?
Yeah.
Okay, quick question. Does that mean you have to, if you flick your skittle or pump your moose,
yeah,
do you have to actually tell your religious leader?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, Matt, you'd be busy.
Well,
I'm just picking on you.
I just
right
wouldn't.
there.
I just wouldn't go. But
I wouldn't get in.
I'll just say this right now.
So there are,
what you do behind your closed doors, whether you're in religion or not, is nobody's business.
But there are purist religions where they, don't do any of that kind of stuff, right?
Sex-based already.
How is it sex-based with the abstinence of sex?
They want to know,
They don't want to know.
Like I said, it's nobody's business.
They don't necessarily want to know. They want you to repent.
Yeah, well, I can repent without telling my fucking religious leader.
Well,
it's none of his business.
Then you're not repenting.
I'm repenting. I repent everything.
Yeah, so that one's probably one of the weirder laws. But I mean, I guess some other religions
do that too.
Yeah, but they're not. I think
they
this.
don't demand you to come out and tell them.
No, this one is more demanding. I find it's just I could just see scenarios just in my mind about what could possibly happen. I mean, you never know. I mean, I don't want to say something that's not true or whatever, but I could think of stuff.
You can speculate.
Yeah, definitely.
So far, I'll let you guys know when it steps into the cult area, but we're not there yet.
All right. So by paying, how do you pronounce that word? Am I it's teething?
It's teething, I think.
Yeah. Basically, that is church members show their gratitude for God for their blessings and resolve it to trust in the Lord rather than in the material things. They also help the work of God in the earth, blessing of other of God's children with opportunity to learn of Him and grow in the gospel. Again, I mean, it's just more like a church thing, but I mean, you could potentially that could get more dangerous as the years go in, I would think.
What?
I mean,
sorry, I don't understand that one. Reread that one.
Pay.
You have to pay.
Yeah. So basically, what you're doing is you're showing their gratitude for God and their blessings, and you're resolving to trust in the Lord rather than in material things. So, for example, you're not buying stuff you're not buying the latest video game, or you're not buying gadgets or a espresso machine or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Or a coffee machine. You're using the money you're giving them to them, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they can spread the word more. Yeah.
Okay.
Participation in lay leaderships. Members are simply asked to be willing to accept assignments that come to them through church leaders. These leaders seek inspiration through prayer about whom to call. Church members, for the most part, are willing to accept these callings. Again, this could be controversial because you never know what they wanted you to do. This is all speculation as well. Yeah. But, I mean, it could potentially lead to something more serious, or it might not. It just depends.
I have something like that covered in.
And ministering to other church members, or called Christ-like caring for others, it is motivated by our desire to follow the commandment to love our neighbor and includes serving people out of the concern for their spiritual and temporal well-being. The Savior set an example of ministering during his life.
Well, they're into having wives. Of course they're into love thy neighbor.
Exactly, right?
You know.
Yeah.
Convert their time.
And most of this you can find on their website, like all the rules and stuff like that, if you're more interested in learning more about it. There is, I mean, I wasn't going to touch on it, but same sex and everything, like, obviously that's a no-no as well in their religion. And that's pretty much for a lot of religions as well. But, I mean, like, they really don't like it at all. Like, you can't, they won't let you be in that relationship. Like, you, and I always feel bad for people that are closeted and that, and they're doing that, and they're part of that religion. I mean, it's probably hard for them, definitely to get out of it as well, you know?
Yeah, like you said.
Now, is this Latter-day Saints itself, or is that just Mormonism?
It's part of Mormon.
Is that just Mormonism, though?
It's both of them are the same.
They're both the same.
Well, are they the same, or are they offshoots of each
They're
other?
the same. There's offshoots of LDS or Mormonism. Like, I'll get into that in some of them.
Okay.
What I was going to say about the religion thing is that nowadays, though, you're seeing more liberal religions like the Protestants and United, Presbyterian being, and even Anglican being more open to same-sex relationships. And I think even Catholics starting to accept it more. Whereas there are some religions out there that are like, no, it's a sin, it's a downright sin. Yet I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there is same-sex relationships or instances in the Bible. I thought you would know because I thought you've mentioned it before.
There's speculation, but there's no.
So it doesn't come right out and say it's a sin in the Bible.
Well, that's just it. The Bible doesn't come right out and say anything.
That's true.
It leads you in different directions and thought patterns, but the damn thing's been edited so many times.
Yeah, it's like a telephone game now.
It's like, if you give me what it really said and what it really meant, then we're on a better page. You just passed it to Greg, and Greg's sleeping. Hi, Greg.
Sorry, I'm just reading more stuff here.
He's catching up. Yeah.
So that's basically all the rules that I found for that part. So now I'm going to talk about the BYU.
What's the BYU? Bring your own body? No.
Bring your own underwear.
Oh.
No, it's
Brigham Young University.
Yeah. What was it?
Brigham.
Brigham Young University. It's a university.
That's gross.
Only for Mormons.
Yeah.
Only for Mormons. It's a university just for Mormons. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, these are the rules, and again, they're pretty much related to faith and all that kind of stuff. So you may not find them as a cult per se, but potentially they could get worse in situations. So
Things can escalate.
yeah. So
I'm still waiting.
So this one, first one is be honest. Makes sense. Live a chaste and virtuous life, including abstaining from sexual relations outside marriage between a man and a woman. Living a chaste and virtuous life also includes no same-sex relations or behavior. No alcohol, cigarettes, tea, coughing, vape.
Tea?
Yep.
Coughing or coffee?
Coffee.
Oh.
Vaping, pot, and other drugs. Attend church regularly. Well, I can't do that. Respect others, including respect others, and don't basically swear. No swearing. You can't swear.
We're fucked.
Yeah, it is. Obey the law.
Abide by the law.
Abide by the law and fellow campus policies, including the dress code. Encourage others in their commitment with honor code. So those are some of the stuff there. And I could tell you about the dress code. Represent the Savior, Jesus Christ, the church, and the church educational system. Preserve an inspiring environment without distraction or disruption. I can't see what.
This is why I don't like scripted stuff. Straight up, this is why I don't like the scripted stuff. But, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, where people are kept in the spirit of unity, so the Holy Ghost can teach truth. Promote modesty, cleanliness, neatness, and restraint in dress and grooming. Maintain an elevated standard of education, institutions of the Church of Jesus Christ. Be modest and fit and style, dressing in a way that would cover everything in a good guideline. Be neat and clean. No sloppy or overly baggy, ragged, or extreme clothing is not acceptable. Hair should be clean, modest, and avoid extreme style and colors. Men's hair should be trimmed. Men should be clean shaven as well. And if you're going to have a mustache, it can't be really bushy. It has to be.
So far, it's just a really pious, very purist religion. So far.
Yep. Now it's your turn.
All right. And that brings us to our first LDS cult. The Laffertys. So many of you may have heard of the miniseries Under the Banner of Heaven. I've mentioned it a few times. And it chronicles the Mormon family of the Laffertys. Patriarch Watson Lafferty married Claudine Jones on June 6, 1940 in the Salt Lake LDS Temple. They had 8 children, 6 sons and 2 daughters. The eldest son, Ron, and the youngest being Alan. Right in the middle was Dan. The Laffertys were described as being a tight-knit family, with Watson teaching his children to be self-sufficient and hard workers. He wasn't afraid to dole out a little corporal punishment and would often raise his hand to his children and even to his wife, Claudine. In 1960, Ron graduated high school, and as in the Mormon culture, that's when they began to embark on their mission. Mission is where they travel away from home and work to convert people into the Mormon religion for 2 years. Ron was ordered to go to Florida for his mission. When Ron Lafferty returned home, he met and married his wife, Diana, and began his family. In 1966, Dan Lafferty began his 2-year mission in Scotland, being the first Lafferty to leave American soil. During his time in Scotland, he met a single mother of 2 daughters, Matilda, who was also on her mission. They returned to the States together with her 2 daughters, got married, and then had a daughter of their own, Rebecca, who Dan delivered himself. As a child, Dan was very mischievous, enjoyed being the center of attention, and that doesn't change as he grew into a man. Alan went off to Brigham Young University, where he met a former beauty queen and journalist major, Brenda. She was not only beautiful, but she was the on-air anchor for the university's news channel. She was ambitious, outspoken, brave, and feisty. 2 years later, in 1983, the two were married. Now, being outspoken and feisty in a woman in the Mormon culture, not really acceptable. It was during this time that Dan was rebuffing the government and refused to be controlled by them. He revoked his driver's license, cut up his social security card, and stopped paying his taxes. He started to see himself as Christ-like and felt that the LDS was getting more and more away from the Mormon doctrine in which Joseph Smith established. He started preaching that women should be at home, taking care of the children, that girls should only wear dresses, and pulled his stepdaughters out of public school. Matilda wasn't overly happy with the change, but her hands were tied. Dan was ruling with his fundamentalist fist. He then began holding meetings called the School of Prophets. He would be joined by Alan and then by Ron. Ron was finding himself falling into financial struggle around this time. He had made some bad financial investments and was falling into a deep depression. Brenda, who was seeing this change in her husband at the time, decided to talk to Ron's wife, Diana. She asked her to talk to Ron to see... Hang on, I don't know if a bug was crawling on me or not, so... okay. Yeah, so she went to Ron's wife, Diana. She asked her to talk to Ron and see if he could rein Dan in Dan's preaching. Diana did talk to Ron, who agreed to go and talk to his brother. He would eventually be sucked in by his brother's words that it was God's will that all these things take place. That it wasn't his fault, but the government's, as to why Ron lost so much money. Dan was preaching how wicked the world was with its wicked people. Watson Lafferty dies of diabetes because he never sought out medical care, as that was against their religious views. And on the heels of this is when Dan and Ron began to go off the deep end. Dan wanted to introduce polygamy, but Matilda wasn't for that. She caught Dan with her 14-year-old daughter, his stepdaughter, sitting on his lap as he fondled her breast. He said he wouldn't do it again, but of course he did. The last straw for Matilda was when Dan proclaimed that he wanted to take his 14-year-old stepdaughter as his second wife. Matilda said no, of course. Eventually did take a second wife, a Romanian woman named Anne, but the LDS wasn't having any of this and excommunicated Dan and Ron Lafferty. There was no way Brenda was having any of this either. She met with Diana and Matilda and basically told them to stand up for themselves and to not go along with their husband's new views. Or old views, I guess, how you want to look at it. Dan announced his older brother as the leader of this group. Brenda pulls Alan away from this. She wasn't having any of it, and after her little talk with Diana and Matilda, Diana took the children and left Ron. Ron was starting to have revelations. One of the earlier ones was that Diana was married to Satan in her previous life. It was this one he shared with his brothers and a small group of men that came to the meetings, which would be the scariest of all. The revelations of removal, as it has become known as. The Lord talked to Ron as his prophet and called to him that there must be a removal of people in the name of God's work, who are standing in the Lord's way, or close to that kind of bullshit. On that list was 4 names. Brenda Lafferty, Alan's wife, Alan and Brenda's 15-month-old daughter, Erica, Chloe Lowe, and Richard Stowe. So with God's hit list in hand, Dan's wife, Matilda, leaving him, Dan and Ron leave as well. During their departure, Alan and Brenda put their marriage back together and are back on the right track, and Alan knew of this. So Alan knew of this so-called revelation, but never believed that his brothers were capable of it. While Dan and Ron are out gallivanting around, they find 2 hitchhikers, Rick Knapp and Chip Carnes. July 24th, 1984, Dan, Ron, Rick, and Chip loaded up knives, a shotgun, and ammo and arrived at Brenda and Alan's home around 1:30 p.m. Alan was 70 miles away for work, leaving his wife and baby daughter alone. Rick and Chip remained in Ron's green station wagon while Dan and Ron walked up to the front door and knocked, but Brenda didn't answer, so they leave. And at first it was a relief, but then Dan realized something. Ron was the voice of God, and he was the hand of God. They went back, and this time, Brenda answered the door. Dan knocked Brenda to the floor and began beating her while Ron stood by and watched. He then grabbed the cord from the vacuum cleaner and strangled her before slicing into her throat so deep that he cut into her spinal cord. After she was dead, Dan did what you think he did. He walked back and he killed 15-month-old Erica. Nearly decapitated her. 50-month-old baby.
No. Now,
sorry, this is vomit break.
So, first off, the Latter-day Saints had already gotten rid of them.
Yes, but they were still preaching in the name of them.
Not necessarily.
Yes, they were.
How are they preaching in the name of them?
They were still trying to indoctrinate the Mormon stuff from back in the day. They were preaching outside of the church still.
Yes, but I'm saying the Mormons themselves had already removed themselves from them.
Yes, but they're still connected. It's still connected.
Yeah, but so are Christian-based cults and stuff.
Yeah, and who's to say that those are things too?
But that's what I'm saying. He's not part of the religion anymore. He's got his own offsect and his own ways of thinking that is causing problems.
But it's still based on it, and he was born out of this religion.
A lot of cults, people are born out of many religions.
Yeah, well, they're all cults, in my opinion. I already stated that.
But this one is not connected to Mormonism so far because they've removed him from.
Anyways, that had to be the most disgusting murder out of the whole series. Anyways. Which is weird, because I didn't get that emotional when I was writing everything. Anyways, Alan arrived home after 8 p.m., saw his wife's car in the driveway, but found the front door locked. They never locked the front door when they were home. He went in and discovered the gruesome scene. He called the police from a neighbor's house, and while being questioned by police, he tells them of Ron's revelation, and that he never took it seriously because he believed his brothers were not killers. Manhunt began for Ron and Dan Lafferty. They found Rick and Chip, who had gone their separate ways from the two older Laffertys, and gave them up. Eventually, FBI caught up with Dan and Ron in Reno, Nevada at a casino. They were charged and convicted of aggravated burglary, 2 counts of first-degree murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. They did not kill the other 2 on the list. None of them were home. They were away, which is probably a good thing. Dan received 2 life sentences, and Ron received the death penalty. Rick and Chip received a reduced sentence for testifying against the brothers. But unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. In 2008, a woman named Christy Strack began to correspond with Dan Lafferty, and she and her husband Ben even began visiting him in prison. She was 8 years old when the murders took place. For some reason, she became enamored with his teachings and with him. They talked about the end of the world and life, families, and religious philosophies. She often expressed the idea of killing herself and her children to leave this evil world behind. Dan encouraged her to do this, and on September 27th, 2014, Christy and Ben gave 3 out of the 4 children and themselves a lethal cocktail of methadone, prescription medication, cough syrup, and lied down as a family on their bed and died. They were found by their eldest son, who was not in the house at the time of the murder-suicide, and Dan Lafferty proudly takes credit for this. He has felt no remorse for what he did to Brenda and the baby, nor this event that wiped out 5 people. He's still in prison to this day. Ron Lafferty died in prison in 2019 of natural causes at the age of who gives a fuck. The LDS Church was quick to try to remove themselves of this, with former LDS President Gordon Hinckley stating, quote, "The Lafferty brothers have no connection to us whatsoever. They don't belong to the church. There are no Mormon fundamentalists." Oh, but there is.
There are no true Mormon fundamentalists. So that was a group of people that, yes, being Mormon, went nuts.
Yeah.
Just like how the guy I did, the guy with the Heaven's Gate
Marshall
stuff.
Applewhite.
Marshall Applewhite, thank you. He was very religious, but he was Christian, and then he clearly went insane and started an actual cult, whereas this is just like a couple brothers that they didn't really gather people into the cult.
They had their people.
Yeah, they did like the week meetings or whatever.
Yeah, they had their meetings at their house.
They had their meetings and stuff, but
anyways,
yeah, okay.
Maybe it might not be like a traditional cult per se. It could have been like.
But still, they were still using the Mormon doctrine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
and a lot of the cults do. They'll take an off sect of. But my point is that it wasn't the Latter-day Saints themselves. It wasn't that religion. It was an off sect of that religion, just like there's off sects of Christianity.
Okay. Well, I'm not done.
Okay. Yeah, it's still disgusting and gross, and those 2 should rot in whatever hell they believe in.
Oh, they will. But anyways, when he said there are no Mormon fundamentalists, well, Ervil LeBaron says, hold my root beer.
Root beer because they're not allowed to drink alcohol.
So the LeBarons. Okay. Strap on your helmet, because this one's a bumpy one. Ervil LeBaron was known as the Mormon Manson. He's actually worse, in my opinion. His thirst for power and control and dominance surpasses anything Charles Manson has done. In fact, he makes Manson look like a choir boy. Ervil LeBaron grew up in the Mormon faith in a polygamous community. Ervil and his brother Joel LeBaron began the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times in Mexico. Try saying that 5 times fast.
Wow.
Yeah. The LeBaron family had to keep constantly moving in order to evade law enforcement, as polygamy is and was illegal. The brothers believed in the Mormon doctrine and the 3 degrees of the glory. 1, telestial. 2, terrestrial. And 3, the highest of all, celestial. In order to obtain the celestial level in heaven, you had to live the plural marriage lifestyle. It's the only way you could live in glory in heaven.
Interesting view. Doesn't sound very Latter-day Saints, but
they are.
They do have the polygamy thing.
They are your fundamentalist Mormons.
What, these ones that you're talking about? Yeah.
The LeBarons lived in colonial LeBaron in Mexico, but had factions in Texas, Utah, and Colorado. Colonial LeBaron was a compound in the middle of nowhere, where even today many LeBarons still live and practice polygamy. Joel LeBaron was deemed the one mighty and strong, and was the one true prophet, and took over their father's post as the head. With Joel leading, Ervil took the supporting role, but together the LeBaron brothers were going to usher in the second coming of Christ. Tailing behind them was their younger brother Verlin, who was also practicing polygamy. Joel doesn't seem half bad, but he had one wife and at least one son that I could find information on. Ervil had 14 wives and approximately 50 to 55 children as well as stepchildren. Verlin had 10 wives and 58 children with 8 of those wives. It's a hot dog down a hallway situation. Joel was seen as the most powerful prophet, but it was Ervil who was the big talker, the highly intelligent, good-looking, and most charismatic, and was able to convert anyone, then bring them into the colony. The LeBarons got their money through their followers, having them renounce and sell off their belongings in order to help their commune to sustain everyone. But tension between Ervil and his two brothers began to grow, as Ervil never seemed to do anything to support his own family or to help the rest of them. It was because of this that Joel had to excommunicate Ervil from the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullest of Times.
So he's also been removed from the Latter-day Saints.
Of his own family's church, yes. But he starts his own. Ervil goes off
and that's what I'm thinking. These are offshoots.
Can I just get through this?
Fine.
It's hard enough.
Go ahead.
Ervil goes off and begins his own church, which he called the Church of the Lamb of God. That wasn't enough for Ervil. He had to compete against his brother Joel for followers. Only about 100 followed him from the first church, while his brother still had well over 1,000. He felt that he himself was the one true prophet. He was still lacking complete control and wasn't about to just roll over. No, Ervil LeBaron was about to embark on a mission of mass murder. As he begins to build up his followers, he starts arming them, including the children, and virtually turning them into his own militia. His right-hand man is Daniel Jordan, who was always by Ervil's side. Ervil promised his 42-year-old soldier of faith his 15-year-old stepdaughter, Faye. Reluctantly, because you weren't allowed to say no, Faye marries Dan Jordan in a double ceremony with one of her sisters. This is a disgusting yet seen as a normal practice in the Mormon faith. Girls as young as 12 are groomed to become part of the sister wives of one man who is at least twice their age and illegal. Faye would go on to have 4 children with Jordan. He's described as a nasty, impatient, brutal, abusive man. Ervil convinces his followers that Joel's followers are wicked and must be dealt with. In 1972, in Esconda, Mexico, Ervil's followers lured Joel LeBaron to an abandoned shack where Dan Jordan beats him and forces a gun into Joel's mouth and shoots him dead. No surprise that Ervil would become the prime suspect in his brother's murder, but he was already on the run. This was normal for him. He would constantly have his huge family moving from one state to another in order to evade law enforcement. It was normal for the children to be woken up in the middle of the night and ushered into the back of a big van and moved to another house somewhere in a completely different state. In 1977, while in Dallas, the children were woken up in the middle of the night and driven to Denver, Colorado, where 3 wives and 20 children now lived in a 1,500 square foot house. The children had to sleep on the floor, and they were not allowed to play outside and had to hide if anyone came to the door. They were not allowed to be seen at all. They were also taught to see law enforcement as the instruments of Satan, and if they were to be asked any questions, they were only allowed to say, "I don't know." Ervil's plan to obtain Joel's followers did not work out the way that he had planned. Instead, his younger brother Verlin took over, in placing an Ervil-sized target on himself. Ervil's cult, under his orders, walked into the Molinas, Mexico village where Verlin's temple was, and where his followers lived in close to the temple, and set Verlin's temple on fire, then shot up homes and tossed Molotov cocktails on their rooftops. 24 homes burnt down, 2 people died, and many were injured. But Ervil was smart. He would order the murders, but always made sure that he was far, far away when they were carried out. One failed mission was that Verlin was not there that night, so another plan was concocted. One that would take out another polygamous leader rival, and one that would draw Verlin out at the same time. One of his wives, 16-year-old Rena Shanoff, and one of Dan Jordan's wife, 17-year-old Ramona Marston, were set to kill polygamous leader Rulon Allred. Allred was a respected naturopathic doctor in Utah who had 7 wives and 48 children. On May 19, 1977, Rena and Ramona, dressed in disguises, walked into Allred's clinic, and Rena shot him 4 times. They then left, but then they returned to make sure he was dead. She shot him in the head. Neither Rena or Ramona wanted to kill anyone, but you did as you were told, or you and your children would be killed. The assassination of Rulon Allred complete, Ervil wanted his followers to go to Allred's funeral to kill Verlin LeBaron. They were unable to complete that mission because although Verlin LeBaron showed up to pay his respects to Allred, the police had anticipated more violence and had surrounded the funeral, thwarting any attempts from Ervil's crew to pull off another assassination. Ervil was very pissed off at the failure of this mission. He's so evil that he also had his daughter Rebecca killed. She was pregnant with her second child at the age of 17. She didn't want to be a plural wife and may have had a mental illness, but she defied her father and was killed for it. One of Ervil's wives, Delphina, and one of their son, Isaac, ran away from Ervil and his cult. Together they went to law enforcement and gave them a list of people who were involved in the murder and also gave up Ervil. Seeing more of it now?
Well, yeah, but it's also still separated from... yes, it comes from.
Yeah.
But, I don't want you to be looking like you're pointing the blame at the religion part of it.
No, because when we could say the same thing about the other aspect of the other ones, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that there seems to be more connected.
It does seem like
That's my point.
Mormonism is able to birth these kind of offset cults. Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's what my point is.
But there is a very, very thin line between religion and cult.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And that's what I mean. Anytime he's getting excommunicated because he's acting inappropriately, that's the religion saying, no, you're not following anything you're supposed to be doing related to our religion. And then those people are usually the ones that go crazy and say, well, I'm going to start my own. And
yeah, they start their own church, yes, but it's still in their mind, part of the religion.
In their mind, but it's not.
Yeah. The home in Denver was raided, and once again, the children got moved back to Mexico, where 2 of his children were placed in one of his followers' apartments. Anna was 9, and her brother Hiram was 6. Anna was molested while living there. She also remembered that it was during this stay where she met her father, Ervil LeBaron, for the first time. So he didn't even know half of his children.
Of course not. If he's too busy running, he's too busy running.
He has 50 of them. In 1978, the federal...
I missed in the rules. Was there no allowing of contraceptives? Was that one actually...
fornicated, right? To procreate, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. I'm sure they did have sex without...
I think it was more so they weren't allowed...
It wasn't allowed. You couldn't...
You could only have sex to procreate?
Yeah. You couldn't do anything sexually unless you were going to have children. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so, they mainly probably had it so that...
But he also had 13 wives. So.
You couldn't use contraceptives,
no.
Which is what I think the Catholics way back in the day used to say. You couldn't use
they can't use birth control.
They can't use birth controls and stuff. So in that respect, every time they're getting the hanky-panky on, a new kid is ready to go, right?
Yeah. So in 1978, the Federales raided the apartment, having just missed Ervil, but they found Rena Shanoff and Dan Jordan. Jordan tells them that he is Ervil LeBaron, and they believe him. At the same time, Rena's brother Victor and Mark Shanoff were also arrested. Mark was married to one of Ervil's daughter, Lillian. Ramona's brother Ervil's son, Eddie Marston, was also arrested, but Ramona was in hiding. They were all tried in court and would be acquitted for Allred's murder, and Jordan was acquitted in Mexico for Joel's murder. Ervil was in hiding, and the Mexican authorities had sort of given up looking for him. It wasn't until Jonestown, which occurred in South America when both American and Mexican authorities came together in order to prevent another Jonestown from happening, that they went and arrested Ervil LeBaron and then turned him over to the FBI. In 1980, LeBaron goes on trial in Salt Lake City, Utah, and is found guilty. He was still proclaiming that he was the prophet of God and that the blood atonements were in the name of God. He was sentenced to life in prison. While in prison, LeBaron writes tons of stuff on legal pads and somehow manages to get them smuggled out of the prison. On these pages were the rantings and ravings of a person on the verge of a psychotic break. He ordered his followers to storm the prison and break him out, but on the outside, Dan, Mark, and others see that this is a suicide mission and will not do it. To them, most of what was written by Ervil wasn't making sense to them. He was losing most of his followers. He kept on writing, comprising a hit list of those who have betrayed him, including Dan Jordan, Mark Shanoff, and more. Ervil died in his prison cell in 1981 at the age of 56. The listed COD was a heart attack. Other reports state that he must have been strangled as his neck and throat showed signs of hemorrhaging. Despite his death, somehow Ervil LeBaron's writings were put together as the Book of the Covenant, a book compiled of insane rantings of violence and death threats, including over 50 people he wants blood atoned. Oh, excuse me. Ervil's church then splinters into 3 groups, one headed by Dan Jordan in Denver, one by Mark Shanoff in Houston, and the other by Ervil's eldest son, Arturo LeBaron, in Mexico. Arturo turns the Church of the Lamb of God into the Kingdom of God, or the KOG. The KOG consisted of most of Ervil's children, all young. In 1983, Arturo is killed by one of his followers, and his brother Hebert takes over. Mark Shanoff and Lillian are slowly edging out of the cult and was determined to give their 5 children a normal life and upbringing. At age 13, Anna LeBaron escapes from her mother after learning that she and her siblings were heading back up to Denver to be under Dan Jordan's control. And Anna didn't want to be under him again, as he was pretty scary and overly controlling. Instead, Lillian, her sister, told her to run. Lillian put Anna up in a hotel until she knew she was safe. Her mother and siblings did spend a little bit of time looking for her, but eventually left without her. Then Mark and Lillian took her in and gave her a normal life. When Anna was about 15, she came across a book about her father, and that's when she learned that she had been born and raised inside a cult and what kind of person her father really was. Meanwhile, Heber kills anyone who defies or questions him or tries to leave, including his brother Andrew. The KOG demands Heber to step down, and surprisingly, he does, allowing his 18-year-old brother Aaron to take over. Aaron is just like his father. Aaron wanted to follow the Book of Covenant and finished what his father demanded. In 1987, Aaron and some of his siblings arrived in Denver and asked to stay with Dan Jordan and his family, pretending that they wanted to be part of Jordan's faction of their father's church. Jordan and some of his wives were aware of Ervil's hit list, and although they didn't feel safe, they allowed Aaron and his siblings to stay. But Jordan kept a gun on him at all times and was extra cautious around the KOG members. He took his kids and some of Ervil's on his usual hunting trip, including Aaron and his siblings. Jordan uncharacteristically dropped his guard down and put his weapon away in order to go to the bush to do his business. It was during this time that he was ambushed by members of the KOG, and right away Aaron was under police suspicion, but was never charged. He wasn't involved in the murder of Dan Jordan directly. He ordered it, though. Eddie Marson and brothers Mark and Dwayne Shanoff all owned appliance repair shops in Texas. Eddie's was near Dallas, and the Shanoff brothers had theirs in different locations in Houston. Eddie and Dwayne both had appointments to meet potential clients at the same time on June 27, 1988, at different locations. At 4 p.m. on June 27th, Eddie pulled up to the designated meeting place in Dallas, while in Houston at the exact same time, Dwayne, who also had his 8-year-old daughter Jenny with him, pulled up to his designated meeting place. Mark was in his shop in Houston. When the 3 men, all wearing identical disguises, showed up to each location and kills Eddie, Mark, Dwayne, and as collateral, unfortunately, Jenny. This becomes known as the 4 o'clock murders. 4 o'clock in the Mormon religion is important as it was the time Mormon founder and self-proclaimed prophet Joseph Smith was killed in Carthage jail by an angry mob. All of the family members of the 4 deceased men were placed into protective custody and witness protection. Law enforcement knew who was behind these assassinations, but they didn't have any evidence needed to issue warrants for arrest. The death of her husband, Mark, was overwhelmingly difficult for Lillian Shanoff, and she ended up taking her own life. 3 years after he testified against his father, Ervil LeBaron, Isaac LeBaron died by suicide as well. And those were just a couple of the few that were part of the downfall, like part of the dominoes falling. KOG follower and daughter of Ervil LeBaron, Cynthia LeBaron, became afraid for her life and escapes the colonial LeBaron in Mexico and goes to law enforcement. She cuts a deal for immunity and tells them who was involved in the 4 o'clock murders, Dan Jordan's murder, and her brother Aaron's role in all of it. In 1992, Hebert and Richard LeBaron and Doug Barlow were put on trial for the 4 o'clock murders. Hebert truly believed that the blood atonements were necessary to inherit material and spiritual wealth, and was all done in the name of God. Both Hebert and Doug got life sentences, and Richard received 3 years. In 1995, Aaron is taken into custody but denies being the leader of the cult, or even being part of a cult. But it didn't seem to matter, as he was tried and convicted, and he is sentenced to 45 years to life. In total, 33 people were murdered and 9 died of suicide. But wait, there's more. In 2019, the old LeBaron colony down in Mexico was still very much home to many of the remaining LeBarons. They were just trying to live without any stigma of Ervil and Aaron LeBaron's mess. They were no longer a cult, but just trying to be families. 3 cars carrying 3 mothers and 6 children were traveling from Mexico to Texas when their car was ambushed and all 9 were shot and killed. Authorities believe that it was a mistake and done by the cartel. But it very well could have been, but the LeBaron family, you just never know. So, there's possibly 7,000 LeBarons across 5 generations still living today, and they make up one of the largest families in North America, and they all have completely disavowed Orville LeBaron's doctrine and teachings.
Yeah, which takes it away from the religion.
Now it does, yes.
Yeah.
And now we go to Jeffrey Lundgren.
Okay, we're at 45 minutes.
Well, I'm almost there.
Okay.
So Jeffrey Lundgren, he was part of the RLDS, or Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is a smaller, more progressive offshoot of LDS. The RDLS was starting to become more progressive and was even beginning to allow women into the priesthood. Of course, this libertarian outlook did not get the approval of everyone. Jeffrey Lundgren grew up in the pre-progressive era of the RDLS, a strict family in Independence, Missouri. While in university, he met fellow RLDS member Alice Ketter in 1970. They went out on one date, and then he took it upon himself to call her every night to tell her what she needed to wear the next day and when he thought she should go to bed. He would show up and wait outside of her classes and walk her to the next, but he would also watch her through the windows while she was in class. In a week after the first date, Jeff proposed marriage to Alice. Needless to say, Jeff's family wasn't happy. They called her a whore. It was clear that Jeff wanted to get Alice into bed, and that the only way to do that would to get her to agree to marry him, and it worked. She would get pregnant with the first of 4 children, and then they got married. So just things a little backwards. As all of these stories have gone so far, Jeff Lundgren started to believe that he was a prophet. One who couldn't hold down a job because he was stealing or embezzling from them. He also became abusive towards Alice, not allowing her any access to money. She wasn't even allowed to ask about their bank balance. They were constantly being foreclosed on, and they had to keep moving in with Alice's parents. He was a pathological liar, narcissist, and very controlling. He was arrested for illegally selling a firearm and passing bad checks. He was obsessed with sex of the kinky kind and would force Alice to participate against her will, in even developing an obsession with coprophilia, a paraphilia involving sexual arousal and pleasure from feces. Should have seen Matt's eyebrows just go right up. He would make her sit naked in the bathtub and shit on her face.
Oh, that sounds like a Vince McMahon thing.
Maybe he was Mormon.
Maybe.
Jeff wanted to get into the priesthood but was denied at first. He then tried again and got in. During any of the sermons he led, he was beginning to preach against the more liberal direction of the LDS was heading in. They would be filled with vitriol and rants about the end of the world and death and sins. He was then excommunicated from the Kirtland Temple in Kirtland, Ohio. He also began to hold meetings at his own home and had acquired followers from the temple who felt that Jeff was right. His fundamentalist views were being accepted, and he started to see the power he had over others. The Lundgrens bought a farmhouse and invited the followers to move to their property. He took away many of their rights, discouraged them from communicating with family and friends outside of the commune he was running. No one was allowed to make phone calls unless he suggested it, and when calls were made, they were monitored. In 1988, Lundgren convinced his followers of a new prophecy. The power and blood sacrifice must be made by killing the wicked to appease God. This sacrifice will bring them before God, but only if they were all free of sin, or God would kill them all. He said that only 12 will be able to make the journey to a room full of 16 followers, and that once the sacrifice is made, they will have to seclude themselves into the forest, away from sin and isolate from evil. Once they were free from sin, Lundgren would bring them before God. Former cult member Kevin Curry knew that he was going to be killed and that he wasn't one of the 12 to be brought in front of God. So he defected and went into hiding in fear of his life. Another cult member, Keith Johnson, spoke of a meeting that he and his wife had with Lundgren, where Lundgren explained unless he took another wife, there would have to be a sacrifice. Katherine Johnson volunteered to take the role of Jeff's second wife in order to save a life. Keith Johnson was against this but wasn't really given a choice, and neither did Alice. But Jeff punished his followers if they dared speak against him and broke the rules by having public humiliation sessions where other members would throw accusations and insults and tell you how horrible a person you were for an entire night. Dennis and Cheryl Avery and their 3 daughters were devout RLDS, who also happened to be devoted to Jeff Lundgren, especially Cheryl. They followed the Lundgrens from Independence, Missouri to Kirtland, Ohio, but unlike his other followers, they didn't live at the farmhouse like the others. Jeff hated the Averys. He detested the fact that Cheryl was fiercely independent, a free thinker, and ruled her household. He hated Dennis because of his mild manner and never stood up to his wife. Lundgren viewed Dennis Avery as weak. On the night of April 17th, 1989, the Averys were invited over for dinner at the farmhouse. After dinner, Dennis was invited out to the barn, where he was restrained with duct tape covering his mouth, around his wrists and ankles. He was then tossed into a pit that was dug into the floor of the barn and was shot twice. Then they brought out Cheryl, tied her up the same way, tossed her in the pit, and shot her twice in the chest and once in the abdomen. Trina Avery was age 15. She was tied up, put in the pit, and shot twice in the back, and then the same thing with 13-year-old Rebecca, who was also shot twice, and 7-year-old Karen, who was shot twice in the top of the head. I could not find any information of whether or not they were all shot together after being put into the pit, or if they were killed one by one before the next one was brought to the barn. The day after the Averys' murder, the Kirtland police showed up after receiving countless complaints from neighbors about firearms being discharged and possible occult activity, but after searching the property, they found nothing and left. As planned, Lundgren and his followers went into the forest in Virginia to cleanse themselves of their sin. Kevin Curry couldn't keep silent because he knew of a plan that Lundgren had for May 3rd, and made a call to the FBI and told them that Lundgren had planned to go to the Kirtland Temple and burn it and everything within a 1-mile radius down. When the FBI went to raid the farmhouse, they found it empty, but kept an eye on the temple. In December of 1989, Keith Johnson couldn't let the murders of the Averys go and informed the ATF about the murders and where the family's bodies would be found. 8 months after the horrific murders, the Averys family were found. But by this time, Lundgren had declared himself the god of the whole earth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, he's special looking, too. He was also seeing followers leave him as they came to realize that he was using religion to con them, and he was a false prophet.
Oh, no kidding.
No shit. All of these guys are false prophets, let's face it. Lundgren, Alice, and their eldest son, Damon, would get arrested in California for the murders. Alice and Damon plus 12 others were arrested and charged in their roles in the murder, and Lundgren himself was charged with 5 counts of murder. During the trial, he showed no remorse and gave no apologies for the murders, and that it was for God because he was the prophecy of God. He was convicted on all 5 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. He was executed on October 24, 2006. But I do have a couple more little examples for you. LDS members Susan and Josh Powell had 2 sons, but as their marriage began to fail in 2009, Susan suddenly disappeared and was never found. Both Josh and his brother Michael were named persons of interest. In 2011, Susan's parents were awarded custody of 7-year-old Charles and 5-year-old Braden Powell, with Josh being allowed supervised visits. On February 5th, 2012, Josh locked the court-appointed social worker assigned to supervise his visits out of his house, and he killed the 2 boys with an axe and himself and then set the house on, and an explosion went off. LDS member Mark Hoffman was a counterfeiter, forgery, and convicted murderer. Hoffman was into the art of bomb making, using 2 of those bombs, which killed 2 people who were also part of the LDS, while the 3rd bomb going off accidentally in his car, severely injuring himself. He was then arrested. Warren Jeffs, a leader of another fundamentalist LDS cult, is currently serving a life sentence after being convicted of 2 felony counts of child sex abuse by arranging marriages between his adult male followers and underage girls. So why are there so many LDS Mormon cult-related deaths and sex abuse in this so-called faith?
I know.
I don't have an answer for that, but apparently Matt does. But it's not hard to see so much abuse and murder in a single faith to see that it falls under the category of cult. And yet Mormon is recognized as a religion. Guess what? We aren't even done with this religion yet. In the next episode, we cover the most recent, most confusing case of them all, the Doomsday Cult Mom.
So, the reason why is because they got all these unspent nickels in the spank bank, and they're not allowed to if it's only.
Are you saying it's because they're sexually regressed and that they have they bark out by killing people?
They're pent up. They're not allowed to bust a nut, so they bust a cat.
I guess, considering all these cults are led mostly by men. And women can kind of sustain longer than men can.
Well, I don't know about that, but can have more than men can in a row. You know. Hi, Greg.
I'm still here.
Do you agree with his assessment that it's pent-up sexual aggression?
I could see that. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's one of the rules, and obviously, I mean, if they have to follow that rule, I could believe that, because people could be angry and stuff like that, and then they can't release themselves that way.
Yeah, there's no chill
they
time.
They just do something else, right? Murder,
there's no hot.
Or they could like go to the store and steal something, and maybe, but you know, I mean, or
you know, if they just had a little hawk to spit on that thing, they'd be fine. You know, just a handy every now and again.
Yeah, maybe.
I think what separates this from most religions is the sexual abstinence being preached so hardcore.
Well, it's preached in a lot of things. Like, even if you look at like Shaolin monks and stuff like that, they don't drink alcohol, they don't smoke pot, they don't have sex.
That's the problem. These people haven't smoked any pot.
Well, but the Shaolin monks
they would have been more fucking chill if they.
The Shaolin monks deal no harm to anybody, unless you piss them off, and then they whoop your ass 3 ways from Sunday.
My thought is this though, but whether you believe in God or not, whether you're super religious or not, what happens behind your closed doors in your house, in terms of whether you drop an F-bomb or you smoke a doob or you give yourself a quickie in the shower with the shower head, is your business.
Yeah.
And if you are so obsessed with God looking down on you, then don't do those things. But
well, nowadays we're letting the government do it.
The government is now basically becoming a cult of its own.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Yuppers. We good? That's good for
part 1.
This is part 1.
Part 2 is a little less religious-y and a little more doomsday.
Yeah. Alrighty. Stay tuned, and we shall see you guys next week. Have a good night.